What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the 1-ton build series, and today is going to be the rear axle gearing and locker setup. This rear axle is a full float rear axle, so on either side you have kind of like adjustment sleeves, which makes it super duper easy to do your gearing on this rear axle. As you can see behind me here, I have all Yukon new parts other than the locker, because actively they do not make a 14 bolt zip locker. Unfortunately, I am going to be going with an ARB rear locker, but all the rest, the Yukon gears and Yukon everything else. I do apologize in advance if this video goes long. There's a lot of steps going into doing the gearing in here, so bear with me. It's going to be long and it's going to be a little bit dry. They're not going to be as long as some, because I'm not going super crazy in depth. This is just an overview of what you're doing. If you want to watch the same videos that I watched, it is Ben from JK Gear and Gadgets. He has an awesome step-by-step walkthrough of the entire assembly system. So I'm going to link that one for you guys. He goes a lot more in depth than I do. It's going to be helpful. So watch mine first, check it out, see if that's something you want to do. If so, jump over to him and you'll see everything perfectly done. So the first thing I got to do is definitely get everything out of the boxes. Make sure everything is here. You don't want to be halfway through and realize that you're missing one bushing or one little bolt or something of that sort. And as you can see here, we have a whole bunch of Yukon goodies. We got the gear set for both the front and the rear. I have some tools, and I have the ARB rear differential, which could be the air locking differential. Currently, Yukon does not make a 14 bolt air locker or a zip locker, so I am going to be going with the ARB. It seems like that is the only choice for an air locker currently. I had the privilege of talking to a few of these guys at SEMA this last year in 2022, and they invited me to come take a look at their factory. They didn't want to hide anything. They're like, yeah, come on, we'll show you around, we'll show you our stuff. I gotta go and I gotta see everything that they were doing. And that just influenced so much more of why I am choosing Yukon. I'm going to make another video specifically just talking all about Yukon and why you should choose Yukon. So stick tuned, and up here, make sure you click on that. So I have a few tools that you're going to need for this entire process. The biggest one is the bearing puller kit. The Yukon one has everything you need. I've actually been using this for the entire setup so far, and I've used almost every single one of these pieces, and you are going to want this. If you haven't already been following along, I have already done a 14 bolt, 13 bolt differential cover shave, the non-welding kind. We're going to link that right here. Jump on that, see how I shave the bottom of it. Let's get started on this differential. First thing you want to do is pull the axle shafts out of the axle housings. On the GM 14 bolt, it is very, very simple. You just take the bolts on the outside, on the actual hub itself, and slide those axles on out. Once you got those out, then you just got to take the old gearing out. So we're going to take the differential cover off back here, and we're going to expose the rear gears. For this next part, you want to mark either side the bearing caps. You want to mark which one is which, so you put everything back in the correct way. It is a good idea right now to take a picture of this, because it does have some markings on them from factory. It also has different shapes from inside and out. Take a picture of it so you can reference it later. So I marked it right upper on one side, left upper on the other side. We have two retaining bolts. Hold the alignment pins. They're on there pretty loosely. I'm going to pull these guys off. I'm going to be popping these retainment pins out of the way. You want to make sure and retain all this hardware here. You don't want to lose it. Now that the caps are off, it is time to loosen up the sleeves on the outside. The little pins that kind of sat down like a U and holding it in, that's the actual adjustment to adjust it from side to side. It meaning the differential itself, so pulling the gears closer to the pinion and farther from the pinion. The sleeves themselves are right-handed threaded, so you want to thread them into the axle. On the right side, I'm going to write down on the side there, loosen, down, tighten, up. On the left side, loosen, up, tighten, down, meaning that's the way it screws into the axle housing. You want to rotate them out to the point where the differential is just going to lift right up on out. When the differential is moving around easily inside of the cup, go ahead and lift that guy up on out, and then it is time to start working on the pinion on the front side. Now that we've got the differential out, we are going to switch gears, and we're going to jump over to the pinion side. We're going to rotate the axle fully up and start removing that pinion. Cool thing about the 14 bolt is the pinion is fully removable. You just unbolt it. And then you can actually work on the pinion itself, tighten everything down, get everything how you want it outside of the axle. You don't have to put it in and out to try and adjust things. You do everything on the workbench. Before going too much farther, we're gonna have to pull out the pinion nut, which is an 1.5 inch socket. That's a big boy. You're gonna have to brace the pinion itself so it doesn't spin while you pull that off. So we're pulling off the 6 bolts here with a 9/16 socket. I'm going to be using an impact gun. If you don't already have an impact gun, I highly suggest it for this project. Pulling these things off, and we're going to have access to pull that pinion right on out. With the pinion assembly pushed out, it is time to push out that like little bearing out from the center. It is the end of the pinion where the pinion rests on that. We're going to get a new one, put it in there, so I'm going to knock the old one right on out. I'm going to use a brass punch once again and just tap this guy out. Now that the pinion assembly is pressed out of the differential, got to bring it over here to the shop press. We have to push the pinion out of the assembly itself. If you have a smaller one like me, it's 12 ton, it won't fit through the center, so I've just stacked up some 2x4s, give it some room, start pressing it on out. Pretty much just got to push it probably, I don't know, 1 inch out, and then it falls out. That's the key though, it falls out. So be prepared for that. If you're going to reuse this thing, you don't want this to slam on the ground and break some teeth off. Now that we got the pinion out of the assembly, it is time to start knocking out all the bearings, seals, and things out of this assembly here. So once again, I'm going to take the brass punch and I'm going to start beating these things on out of here. Okay, so got both of the races out of this thing. Fair warning, you are going to smash your hand. There's no way around it. You will smash your hand. Anyway, so we got both the races out. It is time to press the new races back in. And I'm going to reuse the old races to put pressure on the new races to push it all down evenly so I don't have to worry about damaging the races or anything like that. With the new races already in the pinion assembly, it is time to press on the new bearing onto the pinion. Now you do not, and I repeat, do not put pressure on the outside ridge that's holding all the bearings in. If you put pressure on that, you will split it, you will mess it up, and you're going to have to start all over again. So that Yukon bearing puller tube that we were using earlier fits perfectly over this inner race here. That's where you want to put the pressure on. So we're going to throw it on here onto the press and then press this guy down in. There are 2 options when it comes to adjusting the pinion for preload. You have the older version, which is using the crush sleeve. While this is easy, if you over tighten it, you're done. You got to restart. Yukon does provide 2 of these, so if you do mess up one, then you can go get the other one and start all over. These I've heard take 500 foot-pounds if you don't pre-crush them with a press. You're crushing this thing down from 9/100ths of an inch to 83/100ths of an inch, so you're not crushing it too much. Or you have a crush sleeve eliminating kit. This guy is like 60 bucks. You can get it from Yukon. I'll link this one in the description below for you guys as well. For this, you add and subtract shims as you go. And once you have it set perfect, you don't have to worry about crushing the sleeve again. You can tighten the pinion nut all the way down to where you need to and not have to worry about over tightening. And then every time you pull the bearing off, back on, back off as you're adjusting everything. Yeah, you just preset this, and once this is set, you are all set and good to go. This is what I'm using. I am not using the crush sleeves. To start everything off, I'm going to take the old crush sleeve and I'm going to measure it with digital calipers and find out just about what the diameter is. So I'm going to base it off there, 0.82. And we have new shims. All the shims together are a 0.88. As the old pinion was rotating over the years of how many miles, I have no idea, the bearings kind of start settling themselves down the races a little bit. So I'm going to add a little bit onto this guy. We're going to be at 0.85 just to see how that is. We can add more later, take more off later as we see fit. I'm going to throw this together and we're going to test that preload. Now it is time to start reassembling the pinion back into the pinion assembly. Make sure as you're doing everything that you throw some gear oil on the bearings. It's very, very important to pre-lube them so you don't get a incorrect reading when we start testing out the pinion preload a little bit later. And just like the bottom one, we're going to use the press to press in the other bearing. Now this is going to be the one with all the shims underneath it, so just going to press it on down in there and then we can start assembling the yoke on there and see what our preload is. For the initial install, I'm not going to be putting on the new seal. I don't want to be putting the seal on, taking it off, putting it on, taking it off. I will rip it. I just know I will. I'm going to leave the seal off, and I'm going to put the yoke back on here, and I'm going to tighten it all down to 200 foot-pounds. And then we're going to test the preload on the pinion and see how good it is. If it's good to go, I'll pull that yoke back off, throw the seal on. If it's not, then I'm going to have to either add some shims or pull some shims off of there. Either way, we're gonna get it dialed in. Okay, so after lots and lots of trial and error, I finally got this dialed in exactly how I want it. So per manufacturer specifications, the pressure on this needs to be between 20 and 35 inch-pounds. You're gonna want to grab one of these guys. It is a dial indicator telling you how much inch-pounds or how much force it takes to spin something on a socket. The 20 to 35 inch-pounds is with a seal, which I've already put the seal back on there. So right now, we're sitting at about 22. A little on the low end, but it's still within spec, which is exactly what I want it to be. Now that this is all nice and perfect, exactly how I want it, is time to throw it back into the axle. When reinstalling the pinion back into the assembly, you're going to have a whole bunch of shims from the Yukon kit if you got the Yukon Master Overhaul kit. Now these are for a little bit later, so if something was slightly off when we do that paint test on the ring gear, then we're going to add some or take some shims away. Since everything should be set up on here and from factory there's only one of these, I'm only going to put one back on there and we will see if that is good. On here, there's actually a spot where the gear oils can be kicked back up into here. Up on top, there's a little channel, so you want to make sure both of these two are lined up. Bolt it right on in. In my case, I'm going for the ARB rear locking differential, so I don't have to pull anything off of the rear differential that came out of the axle. Since I'm not doing that, I'm going to do everything nice and fresh. No matter what option you go for, you want to make sure you get yourself some new bolts specifically for your gear and differential. Very important. You can pick these up on Yukon. Make sure you get these. They are a specialty bolt, specialty link. You can't find them anywhere. You can't go to some auto parts store and pick them up. First thing you want to do before putting the ring gear on everything is make sure there's no burrs on either the differential or the ring gear itself. Most of the time, they're not going to be on there, but it's good to check just in case. It is time to set the ring gear down on top of the differential. The bolts are going to be coming from the back side and screw into the bottom of the ring gear. I'm going to set it on top of there and I'm going to use those bolts to line everything up. Very, very important. Do not use these bolts to seat it. It'll put too much strain on it, on the gears and the bolts themselves, and it can lead to failure. All I'm doing is I'm putting them on there to line them up and make sure all the holes are in line. While this is still upside down, I am going to thread in all the bolts until they're finger tight, because I need to flip this upside down and I want that ring gear to fall off the entire differential, hit the ground, and break the teeth. In the kit here, you're going to have some red Loctite. Very important to put a dab of red Loctite on each of these ring gear bolts. Don't want any of these things to back out as it's spinning at those super high RPMs. With this now secured in the vise, got to torque it down to 120 foot-pounds. You need to do it in a crisscross pattern. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to get all of these down with a standard little 3/8 ratchet. Now with these fully seated, it is time to take the torque wrench and tighten them all down to 120 foot-pounds. That's quite a bit. You're going to have to hang on to it and hope it doesn't spin on you. Make sure you tighten them down in a star-based pattern. Not a cross pattern, but an actual star back and forth all the way through. And then once everything is torqued down, go through it twice and make sure everything is nice and torqued. Okay, now that my back hurts, holding it and tightening it at the same time, it's time to start pressing the bearings onto the end here. Because this is an air locker, there's one extra step that I'll show you here in a second, but we're going to press bearing on either side and get this ready to throw into the pumpkin. Now the differential is on the press, it is time to press on the new bearings. We're going to start on the gear side of it, where the teeth are at. I'm going to be pressing that down. Now there's one thing to note. The bearing does sit lower at the edge of the differential there, so I cut off the outside race from one of the old bearings, so I have just the inside race that I'm going to use to press it down the rest of the way onto the differential. So this next part is going to be different for an air locker versus an automatic locker or an electronic locker. I won't go over an electronic locker or the other ones right now, but I'm going to go over the air locker. You are going to be taking this ring and placing it on the differential on the non-gear side before putting the bearing on. However, there are 2 seals that need to sit right inside this ring here. You can see where exactly these seals sit. Make sure that everything is nice and clean inside of this. Per instructions with ARB, you want to lubricate these generously. So take some gear oil and lube them up. You want to make sure that these are not twisted when you put them in. Very, very important. They need to seal just perfectly. It is what holds the air going into the locker. If they're twisted, it does start to wear out really, really fast as things start to spin on there, and you are going to lose your air locker. Unfortunately, my camera died as I was pressing this bearing in, but once the air manifold seal thing is on there, you just press the new bearing on just like we did on the other side. It is going to sit extremely close, but it should not be touching that manifold whatsoever. We're going to take this over, and we're going to start installing this into the axle. So this next part is going to be a little bit tricky. I set the locker and the gearing inside the axle, and now we need to find a spot to put this air tube into. On the instructions it says to put it right on top. However, I got a big old truss in the way, which is not going to work to drill or tap or plumb. So what I'm thinking is right here on this back casing, there's a little bit of a nub here. I'm going to shave that flat and then drill through the top of this casing, making sure to avoid all these screw holes. This bearing cap is going to be sitting right there. So we want to make sure as we drill through, we're not going to be causing any interference issues with that right there. For the drilling step, make sure you pull your differential back out. You don't want to get any metal shavings up in the gears or anything like that. That's bad. Now that I got the hole drilled and tapped, and I could thread in this little fitting for the air, it is time to finally install the gears in here for the last time. So theoretically, we're going to tilt this down and start throwing the gears in. With the gears now back into the actual pumpkin itself, we got to start tightening up all the adjustment sleeves. To do so, we got to put the caps back on bearing runs to hold them in place. And then we're going to start tightening it up and getting rid of as much of the backlash as we can. Right now you can feel a lot of the backlash. It is pretty massive. But that's going to all go away once we actually tighten everything up. So I'm going to tighten driver's side, so the non-gear side. Tighten it up over to the pinion until that backlash is pretty much gone. And then I'm going to tighten up the other side, the gearing side, so it kind of holds it in place. Alright, now that everything is tightened down on the sides, I got the caps on, and it's time to check the backlash on here. Basically, I got this guy set up at a 90-degree angle, just barely touching the flat side of the teeth. Got this guy down at 0 degrees. No way. So go all the way direction one way, and then bring it back the opposite direction to test it, and it's like I'm sitting at 5/1000ths of an inch. My feeling at the first time, then sitting the preload and everything, actually got it perfect. Wild. So I'm going to test it 4 different spots, every 90 degrees on this gearing, and make sure they're all within 0.02 of an inch of each other. If they are, then we move on to painting the gear and making sure the pattern on the gears are correct. I did actually get very, very lucky, and everything is between the 5 and 7/1000ths of an inch, which is exactly where we want it. Now it is time to paint this yellow goop on the inside of each of these teeth. We're going to do it on the front and back sides of it, because we're going to rotate it both directions, back and forth, to really get that wear pattern there, see how it looks. So what I'm going to do is rotate the pinion from the back side while putting a little pressure on the front side here, or vice versa, pinions on the front. And what it's going to do is create that perfect contact patch, and then we're going to see where exactly it's contacting on the pinion to the gears. So looking at this pattern on here now, it looks like they're a little bit towards the top of the teeth there, which pulling up the booklet here, looks like the pinion is too far away. Basically I have an extra shim that I need to take out, and then once that shim is out, I should be able to put it back in, and then it should be just about perfect. So it looks really good on here. The pattern looks really good. It's not at the top of the tooth. It's not at the bottom of the tooth. It's towards the top, but it's not at the top, which is good. There's still yellow paint on there. So I'm going to say this is complete. Now I just got to run this airline up here. You want to make sure and run this up so it doesn't hit both the differential or the side pieces because vibrations cause some issues. Then plumb it up through the hole, and then we're going to put that little fitting on there, slide it down, measure out how we need it, cut it, and then we are done. Put the differential cover back on, and this is set. I just got to knock out the wheel speed sensors and the rest of the brake system, but the axle is basically it's ready to bolt into the Jeep here. So that is going to be it for this video. It was not too difficult. It was a lot more daunting thinking about what I was going to do versus having to actually do it. So getting the right tools, which I have linked every single one of them in the description below for you guys, you can do it too. It doesn't take too long, and it's not too bad. So if you guys like the video, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I'm going to see you guys all next time.